This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Step into the refraction with Drunken Avenger #1, The Volunteer, an indie comic by Rick Reason that turns the tropes upside down. 4 men died in 9 seconds. John Stevens survived, but survival has a price. Now, the government calls him a variable. The media calls him the Drunken Avenger. And the city of Meridian is caught in the crossfire between civil liberty and national security. Follow @Drunken Avenger on social media for project updates and previews. Welcome to Lighting the Bat Signal, a Batman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Batman Hush by Jeph Loeb and Jim Lee is the lead singer of Kill Me Kate, Ralph Puma. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to dig into this one.
I do want to take this opportunity on the air to thank you publicly for allowing me to use music from your band for our intro and outro music. So guys, that music you hear at the beginning and the end of these episodes, that's Kill Me Kate.
Yeah, of course, anytime. This has been one of my favorite collaborative partnerships, sharing music, working on podcasts together, all of that.
Yeah, you've been so gracious with me over the years for various projects. I knew coming into this that I wanted the sound of Lighting the Bat Signal, the music, to be different than Digging for Kryptonite. And your music more than delivered. So I thank you. And actually, while we're here, let's do the plugging now. What do you want to share with folks about Kill Me Kate or any other projects that you have going on?
I mean, you can always check out Kill Me Kate. We're on everything. But outside of that, nothing crazy. You can follow me at Ralph Puma, and I'm just, writing away and working on stuff like usual.
Right on. Okay. Batman Hush. I know that just like Batman Begins in our last episode, this is not the most daring selection as far as topics go. Hush is something that's been talked about a lot, covered a lot in the almost 25 years since it first came out, but it looms large in the modern history of Batman publishing. It looms large in my personal fandom. I suspect it does for you as well. We'll compare notes. And it's also top of mind because we recently saw the conclusion of the long-delayed Hush 2, the sequel. So it felt like this would be a great time to revisit the original Batman Hush from Batman 608 through 619. So the year-long saga started in October 2002 and ran through September 2003. This also marks the first multi-part event for Lighting the Bat Signal. For people who listen to my other shows, I love to do that. So in this episode, we're going to focus squarely on that original 12-part storyline. We'll also touch on the 2019 animated adaptation. And then next month, we are going to look at the various sequels to Hush in Gotham Knights, in Paul Dini's work, and of course in Hush 2 itself. So a lot more to come, but I'm excited to really settle in here with the original Batman Hush. Let me toss it to you first. So just tell me where you were in your comic book / Batman fandom when this hit, and how did you receive it back in the day?
So when we moved to Florida, we actually didn't, I don't know if my father did or didn't, but I know that, he was almost on the, the dead list for Steve because he didn't officially cancel his file. So when we came back, we had a stack of comic books, and this was one of the first things that the comic book shop actually suggested to get back into. So for me, this was like 2 or 3 years of having no comics. And then this is the first Batman story I get back into. And it delivered for me. It stuck with me as this is what you suggest to people who are just getting into Batman. It's such a easy entry point, and it gives you enough of the like basics that you'll understand the character after this. That's at least how I feel about it. And what I felt even then, I was like, I knew all of this stuff from reading, No Man's Land, all of these prior storylines, leading up to it. But I had 2 years of no Batman, and then to come right back in, and it's like, we're kind of picking up right where we left off, but we have, at least one major thing move forward in this at the very least.
Okay, gotcha. Now, you mentioned our old comic shop, the late great Alternate Realities, and you mentioned the owner, Steve. And yes, he would have this policy where delinquent customers who didn't pick up their pull list, he would declare them various stages of dead. And when you got to dead, then you were really in trouble. So a little context for that. I'll say for myself, this hit me at a pivotal point in my Batman fan journey. Like I've been talking about in these episodes, by this point in time, by late 2002, I've been reading the Bat books for a while now, starting, of course, with No Man's Land. And then I continued with the Bat books past that point. So I was reading Detective Comics by Greg Rucka and Batman by Ed Brubaker and Gotham Knights by Devin Grayson. And they did the crossover storyline Officer Down. And then most recently, before Hush, we had the whole Bruce Wayne murderer and fugitive business.
Yep.
So I was all in on the Bat books. It's not like I needed to be sold on Batman.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I was very excited when this was announced, primarily because of Jeph Loeb, because I had been such a big fan of his work on the main Superman title and For All Seasons, and of course, in the Batman space, Long Halloween, because by that point in time, certainly I had at least read Long Halloween. So I was excited at the prospect of Jeph Loeb coming on board. As far as the Jim Lee of it all, I've talked about this too in prior episodes. I had never read his X-Men or Wildcat, so I knew the name. I had seen covers. I'm sure I had seen art in Wizard. Like I knew the name, but that wasn't as much of a pull for me as Jeph Loeb writing was. Did you have any frame of reference for Jim Lee heading into this?
Wizard, for sure. Wizard magazine. I don't know why we always got it, but there was definitely stuff in that magazine I shouldn't have been seeing at like 12 and 13 years old, or maybe I should have. I don't know. But Wizard, anytime like Jim Lee's name was brought up in Wizard, it was always with such reverence that to have him doing a monthly was such a big deal.
Yeah. Now, at this point in time, I think it's well established how this project came to be, all the behind the scenes, but I'll lay out a little of it in case anyone needs a refresher. And I will say, I did immerse myself in the extras of the various collected editions. So I have the softcover trade paperback that collects the entire saga that came out in 2013, I believe. But then via the ultra tier of the DC app, I also had access to the 15th anniversary deluxe edition hardcover, the 2019 softcover update, and the relatively recent 20th anniversary hardcover. So I've read a lot of forwards and afterwards about this and seen the various bonus materials. But essentially, around this point in time, Jim Lee was looking to get back into penciling interiors, not just doing covers. And longtime DC art director Mark Chiarello paired him up with Jeph Loeb, who Chiarello had worked with on Batman Dark Victory. And thus, this project was born. And it was particularly important to the creative team, I think Jim Lee especially, that this not be relegated to an original graphic novel or a maxi series, which is what DC editorial wanted, so that they'd have a little bit more breathing room, I suppose, as far as the timetable.
Yeah.
These guys, Jim Lee especially, really wanted this to be in the ongoing monthly flagship Batman title. So much so that there was a $1,000 bet. Are you aware of this?
I saw a little bit of it. I did. The version I had has an interview with Loeb and Lee, so I read that. So yeah, I saw them mention that in passing.
Yeah, there was a $1,000 bet between Lee and the DC editorial team about whether or not he could deliver, I believe it was 4 issues worth of art by a certain point in time. And not only did he meet that, he exceeded that. I think he came in with 100 pages to collect his $1,000. It's one of those things where, unfortunately, we've seen very recently with this creative team, with Hush 2, I think what happens when you don't necessarily adhere to a model like that, Hush 2 was severely delayed. And recently, Jim Lee has spoken about health issues that he's been dealing with, obviously very sympathetic to that. But it's one of those things I remember for years and years and years at the comic shop. We would always talk about how smart DC was knowing that they were dealing with an artist not known for timeliness, to insist on having so many issues in the can first. Because over the years, we've seen so many books from both publishers, both big two publishers, hit delays. And we would always say they should have done what they did with Jim Lee and Hush, you know?
For sure. And, you know, comics is essentially a business, as always. It is a massive business that runs on a monthly timetable. You would think that, you know, sometimes they would get ahead of these things, but it's crazy when you hear that how much it struggles. And we have to remember that it is an art form. Like, you are dealing with like true artists in both writing and, you know, drawing and even the inking. Everyone who works at every level of this is a different artist. And to get any of those people together to be able to create a single book is almost as impossible as getting a movie made. Like, it is damn near impossible and magical that we are able to hold a single issue of comics.
Yeah. You know, you said even the inking, especially the inking, you know, so far we've mentioned Jeph Loeb and Jim Lee, of course, but mentioning all the other members of the team here on inks, Scott Williams, I think the unsung hero of any Jim Lee project on the art side, Alex Sinclair on colors, and the man Jeph Loeb continues to cite as his good luck charm, letterer Richard Starkings. And of course we had Bob Schreck editing. So yes, each player had their part in this, and credit to all of them. So that's a little bit of how the project came to be. And then kind of answering the question that I posed to you a little bit more fully, I was really reflecting on this as I was going through the material again. And let me just say, man, I had a blast rereading Hush and rewatching the movie. Like, I'm really excited to talk about all of this. And
yeah, it was like candy. It was like every issue felt like it took me maybe 30 seconds to read.
There's definitely a propulsive quality to it that really carries you along. I was really impressed by that upon reread. But what I was thinking about is, at the time, like I said, I didn't need to be sold on Batman. I didn't really know much about Jim Lee, but I think what I recognized, and I was 15 when this started, I think what I recognized, and I wouldn't have been conscious of this at the time, I wouldn't have been able to articulate this at the time, but I think on some level, I was recognizing that DC as a publishing company was really putting a lot behind this run. I had, at that point in time, read plenty of crossover events, right? I talked about how I came on to Batman with No Man's Land, but that's one thing. This was an all-star creative team telling 12 uninterrupted issues with no crossovers, no tie-ins, and you really saw this push that DC was giving it, and it felt like an event distinct from those types of crossover events.
Yeah.
And so I think on some level, I just knew, like, oh, this is a big deal. And it proved to be, and was so popular. And this was the other thing that I was reflecting on as I was going through, is, I don't know how much you remember this specifically, but we had multiple second printings with new covers. Yeah. They did what they called a double feature, where they packaged together, they reprinted the first couple of issues, I think before the third one came out, so that people could catch up on it. Thinking a bit down the line, of course, I recall the action figures. It's funny, at that point in time,
I do remember those action figures.
I had those action figures.
Really?
That's the thing. So not only did I have the action figures, I still have the Batman and Catwoman statues based on Jim Lee's art, which are gorgeous. And so at that point in time at the comic shop as a teenager, I was not into action. I was too cool for action figures, right? I was all about the statues. So of course I got those two statues, and they're gorgeous. But I was so pulled in by this that I actually bought that line of Hush action figures. I subsequently sold them at the store down the line, but I did have those for a time. So all of it, it was a ton of fun. And I think this is my most distinct memory of Hush as it was originally coming out. I just remember being so excited for it. And working at the store, all of us had our pick of the week signs.
Yeah.
And so Anthony's pick of the week was planted under the Batman title for most of that year. Now, in retrospect, I'm like, bro, that's insane. Like, you like mix it up a little bit. But that's how into it I was, that I had that sign under that almost the entire run.
At the time, besides, like, you know, there were some crossover events, nothing as big as Crisis on Infinite Earths, I would say. Like, I don't think anything reached those heights from that time period there's like No Man's Land. There's big events that have happened, but nothing reached those heights. This felt like a TV show. This felt like Lost. This felt like everyone was talking about it. People were talking about it years later. Still, like it stuck, and it became like a moment.
Yeah, it did. Now, unfortunately, the other core memory that's tied to this is not as positive, because I remember being so let down when that final issue came out. And let me just say this now. I assume anybody listening to this, you've read Hush, or you're at least aware of the twists. But in case anyone is listening to this, you have never, and somehow you've managed to be unspoiled, we will be spoiling the story, so be warned. But I remember there's only probably 3 instances where I was too excited to wait until I got home to read something, and instead I read it in the car. Because I lived 7 minutes from alternate reality. So in most instances, I could wait until I got home. But I read the 3 times where I was reading it in the car in the parking lot: the last issue of Why the Last Man, the last issue of Identity Crisis, and the last issue of Hush.
Okay.
And I remember reading that final issue of Hush and just being so disappointed with those final reveals. And I think in a lot of ways that sort of colored my view of it in the years since. Although I have revisited it, I reread it a few years ago for another podcast that I did. And then, of course, again now. And I've really, I think, come all the way around on it. And I feel like I have a clear sense of what works, maybe what doesn't work, but what its ultimate value is. And I think this is piggybacking off of what you were getting at before. I think for folks who are looking for a bulletproof mystery, just an airtight mystery story where you get a wholly satisfying payoff and reveal, I don't think this is that story. I think there's something.
This is no Knives Out.
Right. I mean, what makes for a great mystery? I'm no expert, but I would say for myself, it's getting to the end and being surprised in a way where you look back and things make sense in a way that maybe they didn't the first time around. And you're excited to go back and look at it again and see how all of the pieces fit together. That's kind of the ideal scenario for me. And I don't ultimately think we get here with Hush. At the same time, and I was really looking at it closely as I was going through it again, it does track. I would argue that it tracks. I don't know that it's, again, the most satisfying payoff, but I think everything holds together well enough. However, ultimately, I think the true value of this story from the reader's perspective, from DC's perspective as a publishing company, is in this showcase of Batman's world, his rogues gallery, the Bat family, his inner psyche, and more than anything, his relationships with all of the people that populate Gotham City.
Absolutely.
And so I think the characterization and the insight that you get into Bruce's mind and his relationships with all of these people, that's the draw, no pun intended, of this story, right? I think that's what makes it worth revisiting. I think that's why it continues to serve as that gateway comic for so many fans, where you can hand this to somebody. And so I think approaching it with that perspective is probably the way to maximize your enjoyment of it.
Yeah, I definitely, when you said you wanted me to do this one, I was excited to do it. I was honored that you chose me for Hush, but at the same time, I was like, oh man, but that ending. And looking back at like how I was when I first read it, I don't think my media literacy was good back then. I was, 13, 14. I was a kid. And so I remember that ending leaving me confused. So I was like, I want to make sure that I read this and like don't miss a single thing, that I take notes, I see, and I don't see enough like clues that lead to certain things. I don't see enough like, they have red herrings, they have these other moments from like mysteries. And I could say that this maybe fits more in like a noir, but it doesn't, it has, Catwoman is kind of the femme fatale. It has elements of a noir as well, but it doesn't fully deliver on being a mystery or a noir. But what I am satisfied in reading this again was finding those ways to make it work in my own headcanon and finding ways to appreciate what the artists were going for when they were working on this and kind of appreciating it for what it is in the long run. And that took me a while to get there because I do have this kind of like, oh, the ending though. And I don't anymore. I don't think, as you said, it's not, a satisfying full mystery, but it does deliver this perfect kind of Batman story.
Yeah, like I can honestly say that I've made a peace with it that I don't think I felt was attainable as a 16-year-old reading that final issue in the car, being annoyed at how this all wrapped up. I've made my peace with it, and I've come to appreciate what it does deliver on. Drilling down a bit more specifically, I don't know that much plot summary or recap is necessary here because I do assume people are familiar with the story, but essentially we have this new mysterious figure who we'll later come to know as Hush, head wrapped in bandages, wearing this long trench coat, who's orchestrating events, who's manipulating Batman's enemies into operating in newer and deadlier ways. So you have Killer Croc kidnapping this wealthy heir. You have Poison Ivy exerting control over Catwoman. Harley Quinn staging this attack at the opera. Joker shows up at a key moment where it appears he's committed this murder. At the same time, you have Bruce Wayne reconnecting with his childhood friend, Dr. Thomas Elliot, and embarking on this new romance with Catwoman, and even going so far as revealing his secret identity to her. So that's the setup for this. On the note of the romance, well, a lot more to say on the romance, but the context is interesting because I feel like maybe for newer fans who go back to Hush or go to it for the first time, if you've read the Tom King run, for example, where they almost got married, this might seem, I don't know, pedestrian by comparison because you've been in a mode where they've been in this relationship. They've been exploring that dynamic. But at the time, that was a big deal.
Oh, yeah. And I while I was reading this, I had these feelings of like, oh, my God, this feels like I'm reading a comic from the 70s. Like now, the amount like Harley Quinn still with Joker, like, Talia is head of LexCorp, Lex's president. It just felt for the first time like it's of a different time to me. Like it was so modern and so up to date when we first read it. And now I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, wow, this feels like I'm looking at a comic from the 70s. Like all of these characters have evolved so much from this point that it just feels so like they're babies.
Fair. I get where you're coming from on that, but what I continue to be struck by when I do go back to it, to me, there is still a timelessness to it. And yes, there are those instances where, Lex is president and Talia's running LexCorp that plant it firmly within a specific point in time. Tim is Robin. There's no Damian in the picture yet. Sure. But maybe part of the reason why those don't jump out at me so much is that period of time, like early 2000s, is somewhat of a golden age of comic book reading for me personally. So I just feel right at home, and that feels like the most natural thing in the world. And on a positive note, what I was impressed by was how Loeb and Lee, they worked within the existing DC continuity of the day. When Jim Gordon enters the picture, he's not the commissioner anymore after the Officer Down storyline where he was shot and then ultimately retired. But they were still able to work him in, but they were able to reflect where he was at that point in his life and career. So I thought they did a good job of, like I said, balancing the story that they wanted to tell with what was going on in the DCU at the time. And overall, for me at least, still maintaining that timeless quality where I go back to it now and it just still feels so fresh and vibrant.
Yeah.
So hats off to those guys. As we unpack this further and talk about these mysteries and the payoffs and the extent to which they work or don't work, I want to share a handful of comments and questions sent in by our patrons.
Okay.
Because a good handful of them all kind of got at the same idea. And I think it points to what I've observed online and the discourse about Hush, especially in the years since and recently in the wake of Hush 2, which, elephant in the room, we know that has not been particularly well received, and we'll be getting into that more. But I do feel like, not to paint with the broad brush, but I do feel like there has been a fair amount of calling the original Hushes credibility or legacy into question in a way.
Yep.
And that's what a lot of these questions kind of point to. And so I was not surprised, but I was just kind of struck that a bunch of folks kind of circled around the same idea. So Jeph says, I truly don't get the hype over this story. I read it when it came out and once more recently. It's not a bad story, but to me, it feels like any other run-of-the-mill Batman versus all of his enemies story. What is it that makes it so acclaimed? Also, can I please say how silly I find the idea of Huntress wearing a belly shirt? She's a human urban vigilante who regularly comes under gunfire, and she leaves her torso totally exposed. I mean, on that last note, I think that's what Jim Lee wanted to draw. I think that's what it comes down to. But no, not the most practical. Tyler says, do you feel that Loeb sticks the landing to his mysteries, generally, and here in particular? Jan says, what are your thoughts on how Loeb writes dialogue? The older I get, I become somewhat allergic to it. Feels like a bad Frank Miller impression. I have to say, you're nodding along. You share that sentiment?
I think there's some datedness in some of the dialogue for sure. I don't, it's not silly. I don't think it's anything too offensive in as far as, you know, where we're at culturally, but I just, while reading it, I did have some moments of like, okay, I can't pinpoint it right in this second, but I should have been marking that down, especially if we were going to get a question like this one.
No, that's fair. I mean, I had that in my head as I was reading. I wasn't bumped by it, but fair enough. Jan continues, is Jim Lee's artwork the only reason this story is still remembered? Is there another comic in history where the artwork is doing so much to carry the experience as Hush? Jim from the Long Live the Legion podcast says, are you surprised with the traction and longevity a story like Hush and other background retcon stories like it have received? What makes this stand out from those that aren't as well remembered? And in defining background retcon, he's talking about the relationships in the past between Bruce and Tommy, or the Waynes and the Elliots that have been added to the background tapestry. Right? Because that's the thing. When Tommy Elliott shows up here, they were these best friends as kids. Well, he never existed in comic books before the storyline. So now he's being woven back in. And then finally, Rick says, almost 25 years later, do you think Hush is remembered more for Jeph Loeb's mystery, Jim Lee's art, or its role as a gateway Batman story for a generation of readers? Has its legacy changed over time?
Can I try and answer all of these questions in one really broad answer?
There's a reason why I read them all together like that. So yes, go for it.
Okay. So we as fans need to have a bigger discussion about fandom and ownership over characters and properties. We see it in Star Wars. We see it in comic books. We see it in Snyder versus DCU people. There is this, I don't want to use like words like toxic or anything like that, because it's not. Everybody is owed their opinion and everybody is allowed to have it. But what I think we need to start kind of tweaking when it comes to viewing other people's artwork is if we are not explicitly working towards or working on the things that we are critiquing, that we have to learn to be able to accept that that is the canon now. What we have to do is we have to say, this is part of it now. How do I reconcile that this new information I am getting is now an official part of something that I love? You can deny it. You could say, oh, I won't read that. It doesn't exist. And it doesn't have to for you. But if you're going to participate in the corporation's properties and what they're putting out, it's a part of it. Hush may not be a perfect story. It may not be a perfect mystery. It may not, deliver on newer aspects that people are looking for from Batman, but it's a part of it. And we have to, appreciate it for what it is, incorporate it into our storytelling of the character's history, and move forward. Like the other thing that you can do with Batman is these, pre-retcons. They happen all the time. The Court of Owls, Tommy Elliott, they're a key part of Batman. He has such a firm understanding of who his parents are, what his mission is, who he was before as a child, and who he is now as a man, as Batman, that every time you introduce that, it is important to a Batman story because it calls into question everything that he believes, and he has to come face to face with his rigidity in his beliefs of what his reality is. And every time those get shattered. Otherwise, you can't have a Batman story. Otherwise, he's a perfect individual with rigid beliefs, and he's a lawman, and he beats up the bad guys, and that's it. And that's, but once you introduce these retcons, these mysteries from his past that reveal something about him, now you've got meat there.
Yeah, man, I hear you. So I'll say for myself, and I guess before I give my answer, I fully acknowledge my bias, right? I have so much nostalgia wrapped up in Hush when I think about being that 15, 16-year-old at Altered Realities, picking it up every month, talking about it at the store. It was just a fun time. And so when I revisit this story, a big part of it is time traveling back to that place in my life and in my fandom. So I recognize that. However, and with all due respect to everyone who expressed their opinion, and everyone's entitled to it, and that's totally fine. For me, I do think the story itself, art aside, is better than I think it has gotten credit for in these recent years. And a big part of it is I simply cannot deny the truth of the experience that I had rereading this. I really enjoyed it. It worked for me in the ways that mattered most to me. And so for someone who is looking for, I think, a tighter mystery with a better payoff, if this doesn't give you that, I understand. Like, I really do. But for me, it's the characterization, and it's that peek into Bruce's mind. Narration is such a hallmark of Loeb's work. And I know for people who have listened to my other podcast, I'm always talking about Loeb's narration, but it is this hallmark of his work. And I love the way we are able to glean insight. When you look at his Superman run, and for all seasons, you have supporting cast members who are commenting on Superman, and you're learning about him that way. Here, you're getting this peek into Bruce's mind himself, which is fascinating. And I think when we talk about it being this great gateway book for people, it is. As someone who worked at a comic shop for a long time, this is one of those books that is a very accessible entry point. You can hand this to someone and say, hey, give this a shot. You'll learn the players in Gotham City and you'll have a fun ride. And I do still stand by that.
The perfect example of like why that is the Joker scene. How many times have we as Batman fans, debated in the store, would Batman kill Joker? Why doesn't he kill Joker? All of this. That scene seems like melodrama. When I read it, when I watched the animated series, it seems so over the top and so in your face obvious of like Batman and Joker that it's like, oh no, this is like to make a child understand what Batman and Joker is. And that is great. And that's okay. We need that for new fans.
Well, yeah, yes, I do think there's something to be said for that. Yeah, I think if you are coming at this from a more advanced, well-versed perspective on Batman mythology, yeah, maybe some of it does seem basic. But what I do want to say, I guess related to that, is from my point of view, it's not just that, you get to see so many of the allies and enemies. It's like, yeah, sure, they're all there and they pop up and it's fun to see Jim Lee draw them. But I think it's the relationships. I keep coming back to this. It's like you are getting insight into these dynamics. You're getting these, I think, effective encapsulations of the role that each of these people serve in Bruce's life. And yeah, if you're going to do a Joker issue in this 12-part story, having it revolve around this eternal question of why doesn't Batman just put a permanent end to him? Makes sense to me. And weaving Gordon in and making a meal out of the history and the continuity, the lore, right? Everything that Joker has subjected Batman and Gordon to, all of those moments, the killing of Jason Todd, the shooting of Barbara Gordon, the shooting of Sarah Essen, all of that is referenced here. So it's not just, and that's one of those things when you look at the animated movie, which again, overall I liked, you lose that narration, you lose a little bit of that texture. And I do feel like it becomes a little bit more basic, but here it's like all of it is part of this lived in experience.
Mainstream audiences still don't really know who Nightwing is. Like, I remember being a kid and being like, oh, Nightwing. And they're like, don't you mean Robin? Or who is Nightwing? And I'm like, it's Robin, but grown up. This is one of my favorite bits of Nightwing. It like there's something about Nightwing and Batman in this that I truly love. When he's talking to him about Selina, like those moments are so good in this to me. And it's just the perfect example of like, this is a grown up Dick Grayson. Like this isn't the little kid Robin. This is who Dick Grayson is now. And once again, like it's a bridge for people who don't know that Nightwing even exists.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. The fact that Dick is like, look, every relationship you've ever had hasn't worked because either you haven't told her you're Bruce or you haven't told her you're Batman. He's like, you got to tell her. No, I love that dynamic. He did feel grown up. The Robins are a great example here. I'm glad you brought up Nightwing because in this story, through that narration, you have Bruce giving essentially his assessment of, at the time, the 3 Robins he had had. And he talked about how Dick had the skill, but he was in it for the excitement and the thrill. That's why he outgrew it and eventually had to become Nightwing. Jason Todd saw it as a game, and that's probably ultimately what got him killed. Tim Drake wants to be the world's greatest detective. He didn't need it. He wanted to be the world's greatest detective, and in time, he probably will. And it's one of those things, maybe for folks who had been reading Batman for decades before me at this point in time, maybe that didn't really land much. But I remember at the time, that encapsulation of the 3 Robins really kind of struck me and has stuck with me. The fact that we get 2 issues in Metropolis and we get a Batman Superman battle.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a little bit of like the greatest hits. And I think it's one of those things, if you're making a list of, okay, what are the things you would want to see in a year-long Batman story? I think these are some of the things that pop up, but I think it all had meaning beyond just checking off a list. At least that's how I always felt about it.
Every character plays a supporting role. And I want to talk more about the Robins of it all and bring in Huntress, because there's a lot of what Bruce says in his personal narration that would lead me as a more experienced comic person to say that I think he sees Helena as more of a replacement than any of the Robins for who he is. The way he talks about her and how he's like training her in his, messed up Bruce Wayne Batman way. And he even says, like, I see a lot of younger me in her, the rage, how she handles things, but she's good. She's better than she knows. And Huntress is one of my favorite characters. I also love Kate Bishop, who's the Marvel and, connection to that. But I truly love Huntress. I was so surprised to see her in this book. I had completely forgotten that she was in it. I don't know if it's the Italian or the archery, like the crossbow stuff, but I always loved Huntress as a character, minus, the belly window at times. I love that original like black and purple costume. That's my favorite. But the way Bruce talks about her, and she's one of the, Bat Fam people, he really is talking like he can see her as a Batman.
Interesting. No, yeah, she definitely stood out. It's funny. I remember she was in it, but I always forget her return appearance later when she faces off with Catwoman, and you find out that Huntress herself was manipulated by Tommy Elliott, that this mysterious stranger approached her with money to upgrade her costume and equipment. That's the part that I always forget. But her saving Bruce after the bat line has been cut and he's lying there in the alley. That's definitely a standout. I want to segue more specifically into these mysteries and how they're ultimately paid off. And as a bridge, what I want to say is, because this was the other big thing that I think struck me and that really helped me make that final bit of peace with Hush. And so I offer this not to say this is how you have to look at it, but for anyone who maybe wants to enjoy it more, but get a little tripped up about the payoffs, let me offer this. As much as it's called Hush and we introduce a new villain called Hush, at the end of the day, the way I look at it, the ultimate opponent here is the doubt and the manipulation that Hush and his accomplice and all the other accomplices and players are able to create in Batman's world and in Batman's mind. The fact that you get to the end of this story and Batman pulls away from Selina because she tells him to hush, and that raises the alarm, and he's not sure, he can't be positive that she wasn't manipulated, that she wasn't working against him in some way. That's the ultimate opponent here, right? Is this doubt and the manipulation. And yes, we can sort of boil it down to this new agent, this new player on the board, but I feel like Hush himself, ultimately secondary. to what happens to all of these relationships. And so reading it through that lens opened it up for me a bit. And then my enjoyment became less dependent on that payoff.
Absolutely. That is a great way to put it. Though I do have, my issues with that ending bit, how it's handled. I completely agree. She says that hush and his trauma immediately jumps to the forefront. Like he's a hurt child. Like,
yeah,
the point to get to Batman, the only way to get to him is psychologically. And these players did that.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about these central mysteries and how they're resolved. So early on in the story, we meet Dr. Thomas Elliot, this world-renowned surgeon operating out of Philadelphia. And he enters the picture when, as I mentioned, the bat line is cut. So this is, we open on Batman searching for and rescuing this little boy, the heir to this fortune, who's been kidnapped and held for ransom by Killer Croc. But Batman knows Croc's probably going to kill this kid after he gets the money. So he's on a mission. By the way, I did love how Bruce is thinking about how Superman would handle the situation.
Yes.
He'd probably smile and say something comforting. He's like, but he's got me and we're in Gotham City. And it's better that way.
It's such a great moment.
I love that bit. And in the midst of this battle with Croc, a mystery figure turns out to be Catwoman. We'll find out she's under the control of Poison Ivy, makes off with the briefcase containing the ransom money. And so Bruce is chasing her through the night sky, and then the bat line is cut and he falls. And I mean, this guy's shattered on the ground, Crime Alley, no less. And I did love these bits about the gas that comes out of the mask and the electricity,
yes.
Right? So these built-in defenses in case he's ever in a situation like this. And I love too, in that opening of the second issue, you see how the Bat family mobilizes around him, right? Like Oracle's on comms and she's seeing who's in the area, and it turns out to be Huntress. Now later we'll find out she was kind of placed there specifically by Hush, but she's the one who's there and she fights off these thugs, and she's able to get him into the Batmobile and get back to the cave. And Alfred is patching him up as best he can, but it can only go so far. And then all of a sudden, he thinks it's an involuntary spasm as Bruce's finger starts tapping, but it turns out it's Morse code, Tommy Elliot.
And that is something about Batman that I first read it and I was like, really? Like, I felt like Justin, where I'm like, oh, this guy is going to tap it out in Morse code. But I was like, no, that's like some 60s craziness. Like I could see that happening in, Batman 66 era stuff. And it's great. It's so silly. And I love it now. At first I was like, I have to reconcile with this. But at the end of that Morse code, I was like, this is silly.
Yeah. Justin DeVoe, one of our more colorful guests in the World of Flat Squirrel podcast. He'll be on the show down the line, and our Bat listeners will get to meet him. But no, I hear you. And so now Tommy Elliot enters the picture, and there are moments where they'll interact now as adults, but we also get this added component of these really gorgeously illustrated flashback sequences colored in watercolor. Did you like that
They're
device?
Beautiful. There's I showed my wife and I was like, look, they do the watercolors, and she was going through the book because it's just such a smart way to handle the medium, to have those differences. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I love that. And so you get to see that Bruce had this best friend, and they would play this war game with these pieces. But so you see that he had this friend, and a friend who wasn't shy to call Alfred Alf, or respond in a kind of flip way to Dr. Thomas Wayne. You got it, Doc. Like, you get a good sense of his characterization at an early age. But you also see through these flashbacks that his parents were in this terrible car accident on a rainy night, and Bruce's dad was operating on them at the hospital. And Bruce promised, my dad will save them. And unfortunately, Thomas is only able to save Thomas Elliot's mother, not his father. And we see the rage that elicits out of a young Tommy Elliot. More to that, which we'll get to, but that's what we're seeing unfold here. Now, I think your take on this, as you're first reading this, depends on maybe how much experience you have with mystery stories. I think if maybe you're a newer reader, you might be reading those early issues, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it doesn't even dawn on you that Tommy Elliot could be Hush, or maybe you're convinced Tommy Elliot is Hush. Like, you're kind of falling for these clues, because it's like, all of a sudden we have a new villain showing up, and we have this new friend from the past who, as we find out, had this maybe has this grudge against Bruce from this moment when they were kids. It's like, it seems pretty obvious. I think if you're maybe a little bit more of a seasoned reader, you've been down this road before, you might say to yourself, oh, this is probably a red herring. It's too obvious, right?
Absolutely. And reading it all checks out so far, I would say. Like everything is kind of moving on track. Yeah. We're getting up to points where I start questioning like, oh, did I miss something? Oh, this happened off screen. Oh, I don't see a lot of the villains evolving as much as they're saying these villains are evolving. There's a lot of stuff that's being said that I don't see happening.
Okay. I'm glad you said that because it's funny. I hadn't fully articulated this, but it was kind of like an itch in the back of my mind. I think you're right. I think there's a good bit more telling than showing when it comes to this idea of my enemies are operating in newer and deadlier ways. It's like, yes, it is unusual for the very animalistic Killer Croc to engage in this sort of kidnapping and ransom scheme. Like that's different.
So, but that's one.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
I don't put the kryptonite lipstick past Poison Ivy. Like, I think that that's something that she is capable of. It's not an evolution of her. I don't know why. Maybe it's on me that I'm looking for these Neron, like, evolutions of Killer Moth to, I forget how to say his newer moth name, but there's not these like full, like Hell's Unleashed evolutions of these characters. Each of his villains are not leveled up in this particular way.
No, that's the thing. I don't disagree. I think that's a fair critique. Like I said, Croc engaging in this kidnapping scheme, like I'll buy into that. This is different from his typical MO. I'll go along with that. Yeah, I mean, Poison Ivy exerting her mind control abilities on Catwoman. Yeah, that doesn't seem that far out of left field. They do make a point about how brazen it would be for Harley Quinn to attack at the opera. Now, I didn't double check dates. If I'm not mistaken, though, I mean, at this point in time in DC Comics continuity, I forget offhand when her solo series started. Remember Carl Kiesel and the Dodsons were the creative team?
I thought her solo series was right on top of No Man's Land, and it just ran.
So I think maybe that's what's out of line for Harley, because if she already was in the mode of her own series where she wasn't an outright villain at that point, maybe a little bit more anti-hero territory, maybe the opera attack was a little bit out of left field. But all in all, I don't disagree with you. I think that's a fair point. I'm glad you brought it up because, I do think this is a case of a little bit more of telling than showing on that front.
And that's you don't know which art you're going to get from Jim Lee in time. You don't know what you're going to have to be able to put together exactly. You don't know how close to the scripts, what you're going to have to say to make up for things that might be missing. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that could lead to these reasons. So it's not like I'm saying this is like, but I personally would love to see more evolution of Batman's villains. Like I truly love like when Joker did the whole plumber thing in Scott Snyder. You know what I mean? That's an evolution of the villain. That's what I would see as like he's a deadlier version. He's a newer version. And that's what I look for when you're saying something like that. And if that's not occurring, especially when it's such minute things and you're saying it over and over again, one time is a big deal with Croc. 2 times with Poison Ivy is a coincidence, but I don't think we get that third time really.
I agree. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they could have leaned more into the timing of the attacks, like that they were all happening so closely. I don't know, something like that. Like maybe we could have pinned a little bit more on that as opposed to, they're operating so differently, when I think you're right. I don't know how differently they really are, but that's what we're told. But so then we get to the halfway point of this story where Thomas Elliot is seemingly shot and killed in the alley outside the opera. And of course we have Joker standing there with the gun. It looks like he's killed him. It turns out that wasn't actually the case. But so at this point in the story, I think if you were maybe that newer reader and you kind of bought this, you thought like, oh, Tommy Elliott, he's got to be Hush, right? Now that seems to be out the window. And if you were the little bit more seasoned reader and you got to this point and you had said to yourself, this is probably a red herring.
Yeah. Then
that's seemingly confirmed at this point. And so I think the feeling I had at the time was like, oh, okay, like now we're going to get to the really interesting payoff here.
But I also believe that it's the same red herring in 10 Little Indians, where I think in Agatha Christie's 10 Little Indians, someone is killed off at around like number 5 or so. And they come back at the end. So, if you're like a very big avid mystery person, that might also be a tell of like, oh, maybe it actually really is Tommy, because now they're throwing you off with this faked out death. That could also be something. I'm just putting it out there as like, that is a possibility for people reading. But if you were to take Tommy Elliot away, who are your suspects?
That's a good question. So this was actually something I was going to pose to you, where throughout the story, there are numerous characters we see in a trench coat, very similar to Hush, and some characters who are full on dressed up as Hush at points. But I guess maybe the biggest contender in my mind was the surgically cured Harvey Dent.
Yes.
So Harvey felt like a contender. Later on in the story, there's a bit where it seems like Harold, the Batcave mechanic and technician, is the one that's behind all of this.
Yeah. Where was he in the flashbacks though? That is my issue with the Harolds of it all.
You know who doesn't disagree with you?
Who?
Jeph Loeb.
Really?
Yeah. So they in those bonus materials in the collected editions, they were, Loeb and Lee were asked about any regrets that they had, any things they would have done differently. And it's funny, Jim Lee has repeatedly cited the same thing, where the way he drew Batman evolved over the course of this year that he did the story. And because he had so much lead time, he really wanted to go back and redraw those early issues to match the way he was drawing Batman a little bit later. It was a little more leaner as the story went on. Not quite as bulky, I suppose, as he was at the beginning. And it seems like Scott Williams and all the rest of them talked him out of it. And they were like, no, like, that's okay. Like, that's part of the process. That's part of the fun of this for fans. Like, you see how the artist evolves. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't think I even noticed. Like,
I don't think I would have noticed unless I read that. You know what I mean? But for Jeph Loeb, yeah, that's the one thing that he has cited in a couple of instances where he wishes he had planted the Harold seed early. Because what you find out ultimately is that there was a reason when Bruce was in the Batcave there, when Alfred was working on him, why Thomas Elliot was the one name he thought of. Yeah. This childhood friend he hadn't had any contact with in years. And what you find out is that Harold had installed this electronic relay in the Bat computer that would flash this subliminal image of Tommy Elliot every time Bruce used the computer, so that when the time came and he was in need of a doctor, that was the first image and name that popped into his head. Yeah. And Harold, this formerly mute hunchback of a character, was fixed by Tommy Elliot. That was how they bought his participation. The Harold bit, and we don't learn all of this until the end of the penultimate issue, and then he's quickly shot and killed.
Yeah.
But he came out of nowhere, and Loeb acknowledged that, and he says he wishes he had planted that seed earlier.
Yeah, I think just even in a watercolor, just like I had forgotten Harold even existed. I think, there was some Harold when I was reading like Tim Drake stuff early on, but I'm not like ultimately familiar with Harold. I don't think he's a key part of Batman lore. So at this time, I don't even think he was really around as much, right? I mean, you were reading more, but
No, I mean, I remember there was one No Man's Land short story, I think, that was about him. I think it was once he saw the city devastated by the earthquake, he ran into the city because this was his opportunity to fix and help.
Yeah.
And that was
oh,
it. I
wow,
mean,
you're bringing me back.
But it's like, off the top of my head, I couldn't think of any other experience I had with the character up until this point in time. And I do remember as a kid reading this and kind of scratching my head a bit when they brought in Harold. My comic shop closed over a decade ago, but if there's one place where I feel that same sense of camaraderie, it's Fat Moose Comics, New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store, led by current owner Sean Hendricks. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany, New Jersey, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. I'm a parent, which means that a family-friendly comic shop is a must, and there's none better than Aw Yeah Comics. Visit one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. Follow them on social media and at awyeahcomics.com for news about signings, live sales, and much more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. I talk about Smallville a lot, But when it comes to listening, one podcast is at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And while their series rewatch has concluded, the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows on the Always Hold On To network. I mean, as far as other contenders, I mean, like I said, I think the surgically altered Harvey Dent, now cured of Two-Face, who removes those bandages in front of Joker and then later approaches Gordon as well. I think back in the day, if I had to make a pick, maybe I would have said him. We see Harold in the trench coat. You see Gordon in the trench coat. Not that I actually thought it was going to be him. But I think the biggest moment, I feel like the piece of this that everyone immediately gravitates to, especially in light of what would transpire in the Batman comics in the years after this, is the moment where it appears that Hush is actually a resurrected Jason Todd.
Which that was so exciting and blew my mind. And that was more than enough for me as a kid.
Yeah, because as you get deeper into the story, Scarecrow enters the picture. And later we'll find out that Scarecrow was involved in this in creating the psychological profiles. What does everyone want? Everyone wants something. And he was the one who helped entice and manipulate everyone. But essentially he lures our heroes to a cemetery and the dug up grave of Jason Todd. Mm-hmm. And standing there holding Tim Drake at knife point is Hush, who removes the bandages to reveal an adult resurrected Jason Todd, AKA the second Robin who had died at the hands of the Joker. And once again, thinking back to that first experience reading it, that hit me so hard. Like that was, and I think this speaks to the power of, yes, the story, but also just kind of Batman mythology and the shared history that we all enjoy, because at that point in time, I hadn't even read Death in the Family yet. I only knew the memory of Jason Todd. I only knew Jason Todd from them referencing him or seeing a flashback. Yet when I got to that, like that blew me away.
Same. And they reference it more than enough that it is, and it's the penultimate issue. You think the final issue will be about that. Like it clicks perfectly.
Yeah. And to your point, it's like this had been seeded because in issue or chapter 8 of this, when Batman and Nightwing deal with Riddler, who has stolen this armored car, they notice this Lazarus Pit ash in the truck. And that ultimately leads Batman to confront Ra's al Ghul, who reveals that one of the Lazarus pits was defiled by someone, and he doesn't know.
And you
who.
also get a little bit of surface level Ra's al Ghul. He's not fully a villain. He's not fully, and you get how he admires and also has disdain for Batman. It's another great Ra's al Ghul moment.
Yeah. And I think we end that Ra's scene with him asking who from your life would want to come back from the dead. And so when you get to that moment towards the end of the story where it's seemingly Jason Todd, it's like, I bought it in the moment.
Yeah.
And look, we know where DC Comics is going. Not too long from now, we're going to get Judd Winnick and Doug Mahnke doing the Under the Hood storyline, where we're actually going to get the proper return of Jason Todd. We're going to get a little bit of a retcon there too, where it's going to turn out that Jason Todd was actually in that cemetery there before he switched places with Clayface. But looking at this story as it is in a vacuum here, it's not Jason Todd at all. It's Clayface in disguise. Now we have another question from a patron here. Eric says, I was enjoying the story until it was revealed that Jason Todd was actually Clayface. I can understand Clayface mimicking Jason's appearance, but voice, mannerisms, and fighting abilities? What do you say? Eric, I would say that Jeph Loeb and Jim Lee took that into account. They addressed that.
Yeah.
Right? They make the point
talk about the Nightwing.
Yeah, that because he's displaying all these acrobatic moves that are out of step with Jason Todd. And so the idea is that they only had so much to work with when it came to this Jason Todd performance. So they modeled a lot of the appearance and abilities on Nightwing. So there's that. And also too, that's why they quote unquote brought him back as an adult, right? So they would have a little bit more freedom in crafting this doppelganger. So I would say they took that into account. That didn't bump me.
Yeah, that didn't, I'm more bummed out that it was Clayface. I do remember feeling genuinely that would have been so cool. and it felt like a letdown. So I was very happy, and Jason became one of my favorites over time, especially that they partnered him up a lot of the time with one of my other favorite complex partners, which is, Roy. So that's another one of my faves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it's one of those things that moment really packed a punch and tracked well enough with what had been going on in the story where you could buy that, that he was actually Hush. And with the benefit of hindsight, knowing where DC was going to go, it's hard not to look back and say, well, why didn't they just bring him back now in Hush? And he could have been the big reveal. But once again, I think the more important point here is how the memory of Batman's greatest failing is used against him. And honestly, whether Jason Todd did turn out to actually be Hush or not, it's the same ultimate effect of him being confronted with his greatest failing as Batman. And so I think it works, and you still get the pop of that moment, even if it is taken away. And then ultimately, as we get to the end of the story, Hush is ultimately revealed to be none other than Tommy Elliott after all. Even if the reveal that, it actually was him all along, maybe leaves a little bit to be desired. I always found his motivation the more interesting piece. How did that land for you? The fact that, as it turns out, he actually wasn't upset that Thomas Wayne couldn't save his father. He was upset that Thomas Wayne saved his mother. He actually sabotaged his parents' car. He wanted them to die. He wanted to inherit their money.
Yeah, no, I really like Tommy Elliott as a character, that he is this sociopathic, wealthy individual. And it's such a nice foil for Bruce to have. He's not a psychopath. You have obviously proven how brilliant he is because of all of these things that he's done to Bruce. And it's such a nice foil, and it's such a, to have like this reverse Batman, it's kind of like the negative Batman, it's that very video gamey kind of character that is Bruce in every way, but without the empathy. Well, not that Bruce is, I wouldn't say empathy. I would say without the moral compass and code.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And look, and we're going to be talking about this next time around, but subsequent stories, specifically what Paul Dini would do with Hush in Detective Comics and Streets of Gotham, really fleshed out the character and put a lot more meat on the bone. But even here, I do remember being struck by that motivation and how it was the inverse of Bruce's experience. I mean, the loss of his parents haunted his whole life and set him on this path. And here you have someone who wanted that, who tried to engineer it. And it was the
saving.
And it was
did it.
Yeah. I mean, that inversion I thought was always intriguing. And I think a fair critique is that this story only fleshes Thomas Elliott out so much. But I think a counterpoint maybe is that I still think this is a satisfying reading experience unto itself, but also Loeb and Lee, like, they put a new character on the board, a new villain. I mean, we talk about Batman having this top tier rogues gallery, no arguments here. It's not all the time that we're adding to it, adding a character who really sticks around. And so the fact that they put a character on the board and they kind of left some room for other creators to do something with them, and other creators did, I think there's something to be said for that.
Absolutely. I really, really like Hush and Tommy Elliott as a character, and it carried through into their other appearances as well. I just found them to be like a character I wanted more of and wanted to, experience more of.
Yeah. And visually, I so appreciate the effective simplicity of this look, the bandages and the trench coat.
It's very classic, like Hollywood noir kind of look. Like if it would work on film very easily.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's something very, very elemental about it. The other thing too, that I find very interesting is that in that climactic final issue, I do think it is, even putting aside subsequent stories and sequels, but just in that original Hush story, I think it's pretty clear Hush is actually Tommy Elliott based on the stories that he's sharing and talking about his motivation, right? It feels pretty clear. And then when you have characters like Harvey Dent, for example, talking about Tommy Elliott performing his surgery, right?
Yeah.
I don't think there's really too much room for interpretation there. Nevertheless, I do think it's intriguing that he's never unmasked in the story.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of that? Because that's a choice. Like there's and Bruce clocks this. It's like I think at least one of the reasons why he dives into the river after Harvey shoots Hush. Right?
Yeah.
It's like he needs to know for sure.
Do you truly think that it is Riddler and Tommy and they're messing with him still? Like what do you feel about that? Like I think the Riddler of it all complicates things I don't know if it's an interesting way. I personally never saw Riddler as a C-lister like they're talking to him, but Batman Forever is really formative for me. And so to me, like that is who Riddler is. So I never saw him as this like second rate kind of villain. Is Riddler actually Hush? And is he the orchestrator? Or is he claiming that he is for the notoriety? Like, how do you reconcile like Riddler as Hush versus Tommy Elliott as Hush? Or are they both Hush? Or is Hush the idea that this conglomerate of villains creates?
Oh yeah, interesting. And yeah, so right, so that's sort of the 1-2 punch here, right? In this final issue that we have Hush revealed more or less as Tommy Elliott after all, who hadn't been killed, but rather Clayface had stepped in for him in that alley earlier on.
Yeah.
But then Bruce is still putting these pieces together and he realizes that Elliot had to have help, right? And he discovers this electronic relay that we talked about and realizes that he would have needed someone the other villains would trust, someone who could approach them. Off panel, we find out that he had also raided Tommy Elliott's medical files and discovered a patient with an incurable brain tumor named Arthur Wynn, aka the creator of the crossword puzzle. And that leads him to Arkham and this final reveal that it's not just Tommy Elliott as Hush, it's the Riddler. I mean, to answer your question, the way I look at it, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, and kind of building off of what I was saying earlier, maybe there's an argument that Hush is just more of this idea, this conspiracy. But I mean, in terms of practically how I think about it, no, I think of Tommy Elliott as Hush and Riddler is the master puppeteer behind him. I mean, that's ultimately how I look at it.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm missing something. Does Nigma ever reveal that he is the one who personally figures it out somehow? Or does Elliot tell him? Or that's what I feel like I'm
Riddler figures it out and tells Elliot, because the whole idea is that Riddler's the one who used the Lazarus pit. And when he came out, there was a sense of clarity that allowed him to finally solve the ultimate riddle, who is Batman. And so he comes out of that pit with the knowledge Bruce Wayne is Batman, shares that with Tommy Elliott, who has this grudge.
That's what I feel like I was missing.
And then they embark on this quest here. So on the Tommy Elliott front, just going back to what I was saying before, I don't know that there's an answer per se, but I do just find it intriguing that Loeb and Lee kept him bandaged, even in that climactic final confrontation. I just think it was an intriguing choice. Like I said, not that I think he's not really Tommy Elliott, but just the fact that they allowed that little nugget of doubt to still persist, at least in Bruce's mind. I just thought that was intriguing. And as far as Tommy Elliott being Hush, yeah, when you look at the story as a whole, it's not the most shocking reveal, I guess. Yes, the fact that you thought he was dead and then he's not, okay. But like I said, I think the motivation is the more interesting and surprising piece of it. And that kind of carries the day a little bit as far as that reveal. As far as the Riddler piece, I think I've made a little bit of peace with this too, man, because historically, whenever I thought about Hush or talked about Hush, my complaint was like, well, when you go back, there are no clues. It's like, yes, Riddler is there in that one scene with the armored car, but it's not like there's really enough where you go back and you're like, oh, I see it now. And overall, I still kind of think that's the case, but they do make this point that he's kind of just up to his usual tricks, unlike these other ones who we're told are operating so differently. So they do identify Riddler as an outlier compared to the other villains when we see Riddler in chapter 8 of the story. Mm-hmm. Is that enough to make that final reveal pack a punch? I don't know. I don't know that it gets us all the way there.
I don't think it felt that way. Even on this read through, it doesn't feel satisfying to me. The brain surgery, the Lazarus pit, it doesn't pull enough for me. I don't know if I needed scenes between Riddler and Tommy to make up for it, which would then kind of take away from the mystery aspects. I don't know what I would need for Riddler to work in this. But once again, like, this is what we have. So, you know, it's part of it. It will always be a part of it, and we have to figure out how to reconcile it for ourselves.
I mean, I think a fair question is whether you need that final reveal at all. Like, did there need to be someone else working with Hush? I mean, I don't know.
No, I personally don't think so. I think it was enough for it to be Tommy, and I think that would have been satisfying enough. And I think that the Riddler of it all complicates it. And I think when I was reading back, I was looking for signs. Like, I was looking, and maybe I missed stuff. Maybe they were really, really extra clever, and I missed, like, you know, a question mark somewhere or something along those lines. But it was hard to place Riddler outside of him being an outlier.
Yeah, I mean, I read this pretty closely with that in mind, and I really think that's the long and short of what you get as far as a Riddler clue. So like I said much earlier in our conversation, I think ultimately it holds together well enough. It tracks. It's just not necessarily the most surprising or satisfying.
Yeah.
I'm with you as well. Like, I never really looked at Riddler as this C-lister either. But I think part of it for Loeb, and he talked about this in one of the interviews, was the way Loeb himself wrote Riddler in the Long Halloween saga. And I'm thinking specifically of the When in Rome offshoot with Catwoman, where I think maybe there was kind of like a jokier, more dismissive take on the character that Loeb himself had kind of fallen into. And so I think he had this idea of wanting to elevate the character, and he saw this as an opportunity to do it.
Yeah, for sure. It also does reference Batman Forever, that Riddler knows the secret, you know, so it does bring him to that same level as how I saw the character initially. So I was like, oh, they're incorporating the thing from the movie into the comics.
And I love the whole thing. What time is it when the elephant sits on the fence? Time to get a new fence. And he's like, everybody knows that. And that's Bruce's whole thing of like, yeah, that's why I know you're not going to tell my secret to anybody, because then it'll be worthless to you. It only has value because only you know it. I like that. Now, went down the Reddit rabbit hole a little bit in preparing for this. And fans seem to be like convinced that Loeb pivoted from his original plans and that he originally intended for Jason Todd to be Hush. That seems to be a prevailing theory out there. And some seem to fall into the camp. They think that he changed course because fans were guessing Jason Todd early on. I think the larger contingent of fans on these Reddit threads seem to think that he still wanted it to be Jason Todd, but was made to pivot by DC editorial, because I guess at this point in time, they weren't going to allow this. Again, these are just theories posited by fans online. What I will say, and I kind of had that in my head as I was going through this, and I disagree with that. I could be totally wrong. I don't know the behind the scenes. Maybe what they're theorizing, maybe that's true. I don't think so. I think that this more or less played out the way it was intended to. And one of the reasons I say that is because of those flashbacks, those watercolor flashbacks. It's like we were called upon to invest in Tommy Elliott and this shared history in a really specific way throughout the story. And I don't think, and that's from very early on, and I don't think that would have been the case if he were going to die halfway through, or if he were just going to be a red herring. And I also think that, because I think some fans maybe glom onto those Jason Todd references throughout the story, right? And they're like, no, like this is what he was building towards. I think Loeb was always building towards that moment in the cemetery of Bruce being confronted with his failing. But I don't think that necessarily means he was intending for Hush to be Jason Todd.
Yeah, I agree. I truly, everything does kind of point to Jason, but it's all there for Thomas Elliott. And what more of an actual red herring than putting Jason Todd in front of the audience? But think about like what that would, we're thinking about it from a fan's perspective, and we're looking at it, you know, emotionally detached in a sense. We're not putting ourselves into Bruce Wayne, who let this child get killed. And now he sees that that child is possibly alive, possibly holds a grudge against him, and what that psychologically does to him. Like, Bruce Wayne at the end of this, at the end of Court of Owls, at the end of Nightfall, at the end of A Long Halloween, is shattered. He should be shattered. Batman should not walk away from his stories like, the world is a great place, I've done my job. I don't think that that's how a Batman story ends. He is a tragedy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and then as far as the Riddler piece, not that I saw people theorizing too much about that, but I guess one of the things that's always been nagging me is how abrupt that Riddler reveal feels.
Mm-hmm.
And we end up with, I think it's a 3-page sequence at Arkham that's like a wall of text. The dialogue between Batman and Riddler as they're explaining this whole plot. However, I think this was a pacing issue. I don't think this was like, oh, they added Riddler at the last second. Because one of the other things Loeb said as far as regrets, he says he wished he had begged DC for 10 extra pages in the final issue.
Okay.
And I think that bears, I think that's true. I think you see why when you look at that really, really text heavy scene between Bruce and Riddler.
I saw that as, the detective, putting it all together moment. Like that
Sure.
happens in every, it's the, the monologues in Knives Out. It's the same with, any of the Agatha Christie stories. Even Fables has a whole bit on it. So I only saw that as that, but I can definitely understand how this book could use the 10 extra pages. There's a lot I feel was missing throughout it. Even I felt there was a lot, like, as we said, talked about, but not shown. And it's, just one of those things where it could use a little bit more there for sure.
Yeah. I mean, the thing, like at the end, now I'm with you. It's like, yes, to inevitably get that download where the villain's explaining his plan and we're getting all of these answers. Sure. It was more just the way it played where it just felt like so much crammed into a few pages. Mm-hmm. So that's why I say, because like I said, the nagging sense of me is like, oh, did they tack on this Riddler thing? I don't think so. I think it was just maybe a pacing issue. And one of the reasons why I say this, putting my Superman hat on, I mean, literally I'm wearing a Superman hat, but putting my Superman hat on for a second, I'm a massive fan of the Jeph Loeb, Joe Kelly era of those super titles. And not too long ago on Digging for Kryptonite, we went through all those stories again. And a good number of them, especially early on in their tenure, like Y2K, for example, or Critical Condition, they ended kind of abruptly where there was kind of a lot crammed in at the end. Now, those final chapters were always written by Joe Kelly because he wrote the final book that came out each month. But nevertheless, they all work together. And so reading those issues, I'm like, yeah, it just feels like a little bit of a pacing thing as they were figuring out the rhythm of these events and how much runway they had. And so that's kind of what I feel about the end here. So like I said, I don't know behind the scenes and I could be totally wrong, but my gut sense in rereading this, and I've read it now like a handful of times and I've read it closely, and I do genuinely think what we see is more or less what was intended. That's my working theory, at least.
I don't think I agree with you. I don't see anywhere that anything seemed like completely sidetracked by editorial. I don't see anywhere where there was any control over this. I felt like the two creators had almost a full run and almost a little bit lacking in editorial. And this goes back to Jan's point of the dialogue, because I finally picked out a point that really got to me. And it was the Lois Lane and the spelling and that whole bit about the therapist, the rapist. Like it was just really cringy. And I don't believe that Lois Lane would need help spelling. And so I think that they had full and total control without editorial kind of being overbearing in any sense, or, making too many major changes.
Overall agreed. Although one of the other things that came up in the bonus material is that initially DC said no to Bruce revealing his secret identity to Selina.
Yeah.
But Jim Lee was savvy enough, because obviously that happens pretty deep into the story, issue 8, if I'm not mistaken. And apparently Jim Lee said to Jeph Loeb, like, just wait, like once this comes out and if it's successful, they'll be a little bit more flexible with us. And that ended up being the case. So that was an instance where I guess they did have some pushback, but overall, I do tend to agree with you.
You know what? That actually makes sense because I felt that the Harvey Dent reveal and the Selena reveal should not have been simultaneous. I think both moments should have been kind of given their due.
Yeah. Although the bonus materials get into this a bit more. I think it was always the intention to have those two happening simultaneously, but I think it was just, or I don't know, he was going to start a romance with her, but he wasn't going to tell her who he is or something like that. But to your point, yeah, maybe letting each of those moments breathe a little bit more wouldn't have been the worst thing. I have to say, I wouldn't have minded a bit more development of this new iteration of Harvey, cured of the Two-Face look and persona. But I really love the fact that he ended up being this spoiler in Hush and Riddler's plan. That he ends, as they say, Harvey Dent emerged as a force for good, right? Contrary to what they had planned. I did really, really like that.
And I like what they do with him over the next few, iterations of his appearances and how he ultimately comes back. I think his arc from this point forward is so satisfying.
I know I was a little bit, I guess it wasn't top of mind. And this reminded me of, like he went through this whole iteration where he was cured. And I know we're ultimately building to that post Infinite Crisis face the face story that James Robinson wrote. So, which I might revisit just for myself. Cause I do remember that. And I'm kind of curious now to follow this iteration of Harvey. There were a few more specific things, just kind of circling back a little bit that I wanted to hit on. And I guess big picture, we talked about how, this is one of those books you can hand to, and it's so cliche because I feel like that's the thing everyone always says about Hush, but it's true. And also I think a distinction here is that so many of the stories that we tend to recommend, whether it's Superman, Batman, a lot of times it is those origin stories or a final story like All-Star Superman or Dark Knight Returns, even though then there was more. But, a lot of times it's these alpha and omega stories. This gives you a full-on mid-career Batman surrounded with the full Bat family at the height of his powers, so to speak. And I feel like there's value in that as well. So I like that aspect of it too, that it's just like full-on, fully established Batman and his world.
Yeah, I was watching the movie with my 11-year-old and he said, "Is this a Batman death story?" And I said, "No, this is actually like right in the middle." Exactly like you just said. We don't have too many of those that, we can reference. Nightfall is huge. It's 2 massive graphic novels. This is nice and self-contained. Long Halloween is still, I would say, early Batman. You're getting Harvey Dent pre. And so it's like in that Batman Begins, the Dark Knight era. It's not, the jump into his, Dark Knight Returns or Dark Knight Rises. We don't get a lot of these. We don't have a lot of these to hand to people, I feel like.
And again, to be clear, it's like, we're not saying, there aren't good Batman stories or good Batman runs, but there is something to that digestible one volume.
Yeah. And I think people need to realize that we're not talking about comic book fans. I'm not, at least. I'm talking about someone who's coming to a comic book store for the first time, or a family member who wants to learn more because they want to know more about the DCU, or we're talking about like people who are just curious, like bat curious and coming into this world,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kind of working our way back a little bit, just to drill down a little bit more on the Joker issue. I mean, it's interesting. We're going to be talking a lot more about this because, have you read any of Hush 2, by the way?
No, I haven't.
Totally fine. But I mean, this is basically the setup, so I'm really not giving away too much. But in Hush 2, Batman makes the choice not just to not kill the Joker, but to actively save the Joker in a situation where he could have otherwise simply not taken action. And this puts him at odds with the Bat family. And that's really the thrust of Hush 2 Part 1, as it were. So it's kind of interesting to see a totally different mode for Batman here. I love that it is ultimately Gordon who steps in, because it was such a nice flip of what we got at the end of No Man's Land when Joker killed Sarah Essen and Gordon had the gun on him. And Batman is the one there who's like, I won't stop you, basically, but gave him that room to make that choice. And obviously Gordon chose not to kill him, but just the fact that it's these two guys together again in this moment felt appropriate.
It's the three of them, and it's that, this not as much, but the three of them together truly discusses law, order, chaos. Like, what do those three things mean? What do those characters play in these positions? You know, if you wanted to do an evolution of that at some point, you put the Joker in a different role in those moments. But, you know, someone's always playing law, someone's playing order, and someone's playing chaos.
Yeah. And look, it's always this will, I think, continue to come up in our various discussions because it comes up in these stories about Batman's refusal to kill the Joker. And to me, it's a very kind of interesting, nuanced conversation. Now, we don't have to get fully into here, but because it's like, there's a difference between him barging into Arkham and kicking down the door to his cell and strangling the Joker versus killing him in the heat of battle versus kind of beating him to death after he's already subdued, like he almost does here. Versus not taking action when he would die. Like there are different permutations of this when we have this conversation. So, it's always interesting, and it's always kind of couched within the reality that, well, DC Comics needs this character to continue because he's very popular and profitable. But then, well, how do you make that make sense within the story?
But also, how do you kill a chaos entity, or can you stop this ultimately? There's that metaphysical kind of discussion happening at all times with this character.
Yeah, but I guess the other main reason why I like this Joker issue so much is that I feel like more often than not, when this subject is broached, it's something like what we see in Hush 2, where it's we as audience members might feel frustration of like, well, Batman, like, why are you why are you not killing him? Why are you actively saving him? I just think there was value in showing that, yes, even Batman can have this moment where he can be ready to cross that line. I think it was important to show that, and then to have Gordon be there to be able to pull him back. So I thought that was a standout. And then the Metropolis two-parter. I mean, by the way, also getting the flashbacks there to young Bruce and young Tommy and seeing Alan Scott flying through the skies and fighting Icicle. Cool, like that was so cool. I've talked about this before on both podcast series, but Bruce thinks something when he's visiting the Daily Planet, which he owns at this point in continuity. And he says something that has been seared into my brain ever since, where he's like, Perry White is too good a reporter to not know Clark is Superman. It makes me think about Jim Gordon, what a good detective he is. And that just feeds into my perpetual headcanon that, Perry White knows, Jim Gordon knows. They're just cool about it. But like that was an early instance of it being articulated and really sticking with me. So I love that.
Yeah, you gotta go back at some point while you're doing this podcast and watch the Teen Titans Go stuff and just do a super clip of Batman and Gordon together, and it is so funny. The two of them just like watching the kids and just cracking up is so funny.
My son had a good run where he was really into it, and so I did get to see a good bunch of it. And it's very delightful. It's a ton of fun. But here ultimately you get Poison Ivy, who's controlling Superman. And so you get a Batman-Superman battle, which again is one of those things that I think if you're doing a greatest hits sort of story, you would want to see. And look, this whole debate about who win, I thought this was very carefully planned out here in terms of the beats of this fight. And the fact that you have Bruce and Selina hiding in the lead-lined tunnels, courtesy of Lex, using the city against Superman. And then lying, saying that he ruptured a gas main, so if you use your heat vision, it's all going to blow up. And then he uses the hypersonics. And then, of course, the ultimate and he has the kryptonite ring as well, giving him a huge advantage. And then the ultimate gambit, having Catwoman go and grab Lois Lane from the Daily Planet. Because Bruce ultimately figures, like, Clark will snap out of this if the situation is dire enough, and it proves to be true. But I thought it was effective in showing Bruce's strategy and ingenuity and how far he actually could get with
against an overwhelming force.
Against an overwhelming force with the right pieces in place, but how ultimately it's like he's barely getting by. Like all of these things had to line up just right.
Yeah.
And the animated movie, they go a step further and they quote that BVS where Batman says like, if Superman wanted it, we'd be dead already, which is ultimately my final take on all of this. It's like, these battles can happen because Superman in some way, shape or form is allowing it, but that then meets Batman's ingenuity and strategy. And it becomes interesting. I love the way that played out.
There's something about when Batman is, as you said, just barely making it, that is really satisfying. I recall like the Batman animated series. It was the one from the mid 2000s, not
The Batman?
yes. And where it always felt like, yeah, he was figuring things out, but he was still new enough that it was kind of like Superman when he's not fully powered. It's that same thing with Batman that I also find satisfying, is like when he's just making it.
Yeah, the just making, I think that's what makes that Metropolis battle sing for me. I think if he were ultra confident and capable and he had Superman licked, it's like, this doesn't really ring true. But the fact that he's able to get as far as he does, but just barely, I think really, really makes it work for me.
Philosophically, where do you stand on Batman saying he's good, but deep down, I'm not?
I'm so glad you brought that up. Because I was going to ask you, I guess what I wrestle with is, well, is it true? I don't think it's true. I think
he's being edgelord Batman. He's being Robert Pattinson broody Batman.
Well, so, right. So so part one, like, I don't think deep down Bruce is a bad person. But then the second part of this is, does Bruce actually believe it when he says that?
I think he does. And I think his reaction to Selina in those two moments, I think that is how they are connected to me. Regardless of how I feel about that final moment with Selina and how I think he's being a complete asshole, that's on me. So that's my perspective as the reader. And I think that those two things, if he doesn't feel that way about himself, he would not act that way in that final moment. So maybe he does feel that way. And as the reader, it's like in the Superman movie, spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen that yet, but when Lex kills somebody, it like reminded me like, oh yeah, Lex is a villain. And even though I like him as a character, he is still ultimately not, doesn't make great choices a lot of the times. Whereas Batman always does his best to make great choices. And his failure is him not believing that ultimately he is good. He's just getting by, with his morality and without those things, almost like Dexter in a sense. Without his code, he's just as bad as the criminals.
So before we talk a little bit more about Catwoman, and that'll be our bridge to the animated movie, and then we'll wrap it up here. But I guess on the comic itself, we got so many characters here. So maybe the answer is no, but is there anyone not represented in the Hush comic book story that you would have wanted to see, either because you're a fan and you just wanted to see them, even if it was a brief moment, or that you think would have served the story in a meaningful way?
No, I think it's enough. I mean, I could always go for more. It always, is satisfying if you can fit as many of them as possible in small roles. I always love a penguin, at the Iceberg Lounge. There's things like that I love about like a long form Batman story where you're trying to hit as many possible things. But no, I don't think that this story was lacking in anybody. Yeah, what about you?
Fair enough. Yeah, Penguin was one that came to mind, Mr. Freeze. But again, like I didn't feel like the story was missing them. I know one who's been cited a bunch by critics of this is the Cassandra Cain Batgirl. And Loeb specifically said, flat out, he was not a fan of that iteration of the character. His Batgirl was Barbara Gordon, who, of course, was Oracle at this point in time. So it's one of those things like, this is another thing I was thinking about, how much the Bat family has grown. It's like now, currently, we have multiple Batgirls and multiple Robins and Duke. Like we have all these characters. The Bat family was a bit more constrained at this point in time. But I think that does make the Cassandra Cain omission a bit more glaring, because Azrael maybe would have been the other one who wasn't there, but it's like almost everyone was represented.
Yeah, we don't need Azrael all the time.
Yeah, I'm okay on the Azrael front. Yeah.
But no, Cassandra Cain does seem like, especially if you have Shiva, who plays a big part in Cass's life. So
yeah, so perhaps that could have been an opportunity. But yeah, no, overall, I'm not sitting here being like, oh, we needed more characters. Like I'm good on that front. So yeah, as far as the Batman Catwoman relationship here, I mean, I was thinking about the context of this because at this point in time, her solo series written by Ed Brubaker was already underway. Nice. The one that started with Darwin Cook on the art, and they did Selina's big score, which it's funny because there's such a point about him embarking on this romance with someone with villainous tendencies, I guess.
Yeah.
Although they do acknowledge she has been in the process of turning over a new, like they do reflect where she's been in the comics. But at the same time, I think like in my mind, because my view of the character is so formed by that Ed Brubaker series where,
Yeah.
yes, maybe more anti-hero territory, but still heroic. It's like, I rationally understand the roots of the character as an antagonist, as a villain, but in my heart, I don't see her that way. So I was way more accepting, I think, of the relationship between them. But like, I recognize what a big step this was. And certainly for him to reveal his identity.
Yeah. Like, you have Talia and Selena. Are there any other great loves for him? He has plenty of girlfriends. It was something that the kid said today. He's like, why is Batman always revealing his identity and kissing girls? He said to me today. And I was like, yes, it is something that he does. But I don't think, like, outside of, Selena and Talia, that there's anyone that of note, right?
No, I was thinking about this. I feel like we had a patron question about this, but I can't find it right this second. But yeah, no, I mean, as much as there have been other love interests, it's like when you think about our other icons of the DC universe, it's like, of course, Clark Kent and Lois Lane, Hal Jordan and Carol Ferris, Barry Allen and Iris West. I don't know that I see it the same with Batman and any one character. And if I did, it would be Catwoman.
Yeah.
And I think largely because of this period of time where in the comics it was formative. So yeah, I mean, I buy
across
that.
all media. We have like Rachel Dawes and Vicky Vale and all of the ones from the films. I'm partial to Chase Meridian. I think she should show up in the comics if she hasn't at this point already. But I think having a psychologist that's constantly analyzing Bruce Wayne and is with him, I think is such a like fun way to even bring her in as a villain of some sort. So
yeah, fair. Yeah. I mean, I guess the way I look at it is, unlike those other characters with Bruce, it just doesn't feel like it's a foregone conclusion. Like, oh, he's in some way, shape or form going to end up with so-and-so, it just feels more open.
We get a lot of future stories with Selena being the person at some point, but it is very much open. And I don't think, I just don't think that there's anyone bigger than Talia or Selena in the comics at the very least.
It was surprising then as it was happening. And even now in retrospect, looking back at it, even though I know it's coming, that he goes so far as revealing his secret identity. Like that feels like such a big step for him to take.
Yeah.
And I wonder, it's like, how much was that speech by Nightwing influencing? Like how much of an impact did that have? The fact that he had just seemingly buried Thomas Elliot and he's being put through this gauntlet, right? Like he's worried at the end of the story that he's been manipulated on the romance front. Has he been? Is there maybe some validity to that? Not that Catwoman was working against him per se, but that this relationship and the choices that he's making have been twisted a bit by everything that Hush has been putting him through.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly compromised emotionally, and in that sense, would he compromise his identity because he's feeling that way? I think I read that last bit, and I just don't. I think it's messy. I think that his reaction to the Hush is, extreme. She even says, for someone who has fought him physically, "You're hurting me," like. And then he just stands there like a weirdo, and she's like, I guess this is over, and then leaves. It's a really weird moment that I think is what I saw positive in the animated series, in the animated version over the comic book version.
100%.
And I think the way that the animated version handles it makes a lot more sense. But it also removes the mystery of like, is she somehow... was that a slight dig? And is that just her being Selena? Because Selena is always making digs. And, that's something that she would say about Bruce Wayne. She would tease Bruce Wayne very regularly throughout the book. Selena is also reconciling like, oh, there's this guy that's, kind of a billionaire playboy that I think is tacky. And there's this man that I love that's Batman, and now they're the same person. And so in that moment, is she just making an improper joke? And he takes it the wrong way.
Well, so on that note, it's like, I don't think she thinks she's making a joke because it's like, I think Bruce has only learned the scene before with Riddler that they even call Tommy Elliot Hush. Like, this is an interesting point because the story is called Hush. Like, I think in interviews and such, like they were referring to the character as Hush, but in story, they weren't calling him Hush.
Oh,
right?
Okay. So then
So much so that there's-
truly is his weirdo trauma. He like completely reacts.
Yeah, I think she was just saying what came naturally, like, oh, Hush. But that just triggers him. And so, yeah, and this will be our springboard to the movie before we wrap up here. But yeah, like the movie and the book take different tracks with why Batman and Catwoman aren't ultimately together. Debatable about which is more effective. But I think if the idea here is we really want to lean into this doubt that he has and how this is now going to inform this interaction, this potential relationship, then I think what we get in the comic, it works because it's like, yeah, he's too paranoid. He can't be sure.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's also this other business about him being under some mental influence. And because, right, which character says that to him? I forget offhand.
Scarecrow, I think.
Scarecrow,
says
right?
it in passing.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a reference to him.
Crane.
Right. And so Catwoman is like, well, he could have been bluffing or it could have been that subliminal electronic relay. Like there are possible explanations, but Bruce can't be 100% confident. And so, by the way, though, that last scene, if it's a little bit off to you, there might be a reason for it. That was a revision. The original final scene was Clark and Bruce.
Oh.
Clark and Bruce. Yeah, not Selina. And apparently Jim Lee was like, no, I think we need to end with Selina. And so Jeph Loeb rewrote those pages.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Because Jeph Loeb was preparing to do Superman Batman, and I think he really kind of wanted to lean into that dynamic and to show like Clark was still there for him. Now, the thing that I'm not sure of, the scene before the Riddler confrontation is Clark and Bruce in the cave. So it's like, were we going to have Clark and Bruce, then Bruce and Riddler, and then Clark and Bruce again? Or were we not going to get that previous scene? That I don't know.
No, I think it absolutely makes sense that it should be Catwoman at the end.
Yes, and 1000% should be Cat. Yeah, I mean, is the biggest Superman fan here, but like, no, that needed to be Bruce and Selina.
But that was almost like if that had been done like, I don't know, a little bit differently, it could have been a Casablanca moment because that's what it feels like. It feels like that noir, the detective and the femme fatale, and the femme fatale has revealed to betray the noir detective. And she hasn't. She just says the character's name that she may or may not know.
Right.
And it's his paranoia that breaks it.
Yeah. I think this is another instance, a few more pages maybe to kind of flesh this out a little bit. Like the last two scenes with Riddler and Selina, I think maybe a little bit more, but I think the ultimate point remains intact. So shall we shift over to the animated movie for a couple of minutes here? So this came out in 2019, part of the DC animated movie universe. So this was a series of interconnected films that were largely following the New 52 continuity and basic style of costume and whatnot.
Yeah.
Directed by Justin Copeland and written by Ernie Altbacker, obviously adapted from the comic. And Jason O'Mara as Batman and Jennifer Morrison from Once Upon a Time and How I Met Your Mother fame as Catwoman. I really liked her in this.
Yeah.
In this role. And there are some... I would say overall fairly faithful to a point. There are some relatively minor deviations,
but those deviations are sticking with the animated universe setup, right? So I believe like Talia is not alive in the animated universe, and so all of these changes make sense to me.
Yeah, and when Bruce confronts Lex, like there's actually a Bruce Lex scene that tracks, and they reference the events of Reign of the Supermen. So like all of that, all of that made sense. But so they use Bane instead of Killer Croc. It's Batgirl instead of Huntress, who finds Bruce after he's fallen. So relatively minor changes. But I would say, obviously, far and away the two biggest. One is that it really leans into and amplifies and develops the Batman, Catwoman, and Bruce and Selina romance.
Yeah,
and
it
really
starts with it.
Elevates the romance over the mystery aspect of it, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. We get a gala start. Like I said, I like either Batman's mid-crime solving or we get a gala start. And it's Selina at the gala. And then one of the first things is like, why is she here?
Yeah, I mean, it really gives you more scenes between the two of them. And so it's, whereas in the comic, it's Batman and Catwoman. Whereas in the movie, it's Batman and Catwoman. It's also Bruce and Selina. And then comes the moment where he reveals that he's he's the same person.
Yeah.
And kind of all of this comes together for her. So yeah, they really play with that. There's also, there are, I mean, maybe relatively small moments, but I did think these were some good choices. When in the comic, when they're in Metropolis and they're fighting Superman and Catwoman goes off on her mission to the Daily Planet, she chooses to grab Lois Lane and all of that. But then Lois and Catwoman are just kind of tussling and Lois falls and Superman catches her. In the movie, Catwoman makes the choice to throw Lois off the roof of the Daily Planet. And I thought that was important to give her a moment where she actually makes a choice and it shows how each of them operates. So I thought that was a change that really worked very nicely.
Well, it looks like there were like changes that even Loeb had wanted. Like he wanted Poison Ivy to physically kiss Selena at one point in the comic, and they didn't have that, but they have it in the animated series. And he wanted Batgirl, and so he was able to get her in this. And so it seems like, I don't know if he was executive.
I don't think they had any involvement. I mean,
but it seems like they like went back and like made changes that he would be satisfied with at the very least.
Yeah, it was interesting. But on the other hand, we don't get any of the Bruce Tommy Elliott flashbacks. And why would you? Because here in this story, again, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched the film, this is a major deviation. When Tommy Elliott is killed in that alley outside the opera, he's really killed. That's it. Yeah. He's not Hush. In this story, it's simply Riddler. Riddler is Hush. He's not working with someone in bandages and a trench coat. He is actually under the bandages and trench coat.
Yeah, that was disappointing to me. The first time I had watched it, I was kind of in and out of sleep at that point. So I was like, did that really happen? And so when I watched it again today, just to refresh, I was like, So it is self-contained and on its own merits. It's great. But my issue is if I think Hush as a character alone is Tommy Elliott and is enough, and now you've convoluted it even further. And so if this is your first interaction with this character, once again, like if I was to, show somebody like, hey, I know you don't want to read this, but if you watch this, you'll get who Batman is, which you will. But now you'll have like, oh, Riddler is Hush. And that would be what your belief is canonically. Yeah. And that's my only concern.
No, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, as much as we can debate and have debated how satisfactory the payoff is in the comic, it's like there's something there. And I do feel like the movie's take is a lesser take on Hush, if nothing else, by simply reducing him to an alternate persona of Riddler. Mm-hmm. So that didn't totally land. And look, I get it. Anytime you are adapting a work, especially a mystery where there's a reveal, it's like, how do you make it something that's still going to be surprising for people who know the source material? Debatable whether you need to or not. Like, I don't know, but there seems to be that instinct. And so with that in mind, this is what they went with. And I kind of only got so much out of it. I thought the seeding of the Riddler reveal worked well enough because, like you have Lady Shiva show up early on and tell Bruce, she tips him off about the Lazarus pit that's been used. So they drop that in earlier in the story. It does ultimately culminate in this battle. And here's where, to your point, we do get a major deviation from the comic where Riddler is holding on for dear life. He's about to fall to his death, right?
Yeah.
And Batman just won't let him go. And the whole place is about to explode.
Yeah.
And Selena, I did love this. She goes, oh, screw this shit. And she cuts the line
Yeah.
that Batman's holding, leaving Riddler to fall to his death. But it's like there too, just like that moment with Lois that I was referring to. It's like have her make a choice and do something and show that divide between them.
Yep.
And that's ultimately what leads to their split.
And that was really satisfying to me for that version of the story, at least. And it's very self-contained, the animated movie. It had to make changes that fit the animated movie. You had to cut Harvey. You had to cut Harold. So I understand all of that, and I understand their constraints for this. I just don't think that Riddler as Hush, I think it complicates things for new fans, or, that's just my only gripe. But, they might not know otherwise, so it doesn't matter.
I watched this a few years ago and I didn't come away with a strong impression, yet I was ready to watch it again. And I don't believe it's currently streaming on HBO Max, unless I'm mistaken, but it was like $8 on Blu-ray. And so I ordered it and I'm like, I'll have it. And I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I expected to. And the last thing I want to say on the Batman Catwoman front, what I really liked is that there's a scene earlier on in the movie after he's revealed his identity where they sleep together. So there too, we're seeing them, kind of in a further along in their relationship. And Bruce admits that he thought she had this compulsion to steal, right? Like she could do anything. So if she's doing this instead, it must be she can't help herself. And so that was an interesting moment. And then that final scene between them is a great flip on that and a great callback because she realizes, or her view at least, is he's insane. He can't help himself but save anyone he can, even a villain who deserves to die, even if it comes at the expense of his own life. So I thought that was a great way to tie everything together, their relationship in that movie.
It is really satisfying for the Batman Catwoman of it all. I also really loved the montage. I think that was so perfect.
Because it showed the passage of time.
Was like 2 or 3 moments of them together fighting crime, and she was loving it and he enjoyed it. And then you have that conversation with Nightwing where he's kind of like, in the comic, he says this line where it's like, she's kind of fulfilling the part that, Jason or Tim played for you, where they brought you out of the dark.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the animated movie worth a watch. I mean, it's funny because just like I think it's important for me, at least. I don't want to say this like I'm telling people how to read or watch stuff. For me, reading the comic for the characterization and the relationships, less so for the payoff to the mystery. That is the key for me. Similarly, watching this animated movie, I think if you watch it for the Batman Catwoman romance, the relationship, I think you'll get more out of it than if you're watching it for the payoff to the mystery there.
Absolutely.
And so through that lens, I enjoyed the movie. And it's also one of those things. It's like, if you're adapting Hush thematically, right? Like I think that romance, that relationship is kind of the key piece to really build upon. Like that's your foundation.
I mean, it's the biggest, besides Tommy Elliott being an addition, it's the biggest part of the Batman lore that's added to it is Batman reveals himself. Like that's the moment. That's probably why it's maintained all this time period, regardless of how anyone feels about it. It lasted because that's the moment when Bruce reveals to Selina who he is. And it's opened up so much storytelling potential between the two of them in this world that we all love.
Is there anything else you want to say about Hush in comic book or animated form?
No, I think just remember, I'm one of those fans. We're telling stories, and the memory of the story and how we experience it and what we remember and what the authors are telling are not the truth ever. It is just the story. The truth is your own truth, what you find out of it.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I can't, I know as we're talking about it, and I like to think we've done a good job of pointing out where maybe this fell short, but obviously I think overall for myself, at least, I've come at this from the perspective of, hey, I still enjoy this story. And like I said before, I can't deny the truth of the reading experience that I had the other day. I had a blast going through this again. And so for those who don't get that out of it, totally fine. But for me, this is a story I hold up and I enjoy it for the reasons we talked about. And last thing I'll say is I texted my buddy V. Ken Marion, comic book artist who joined me for our first episode, because I was like, I don't want to just say, oh, Jim Lee's art is gorgeous. I'm like, what? From a technical perspective, what is he doing here? That's so other than drawing these gorgeous characters. And I really appreciated Ken's insight and really talked about how Jim Lee is able to build these 3-dimensional worlds, really laying out our foreground, our middle ground, our background, really making this 3-dimensional space and picking shots and angles that are really dynamic. And I had that in my mind as I was reading as well. So my thanks to Ken, because when it comes to the art side and especially the craft piece of it, my insight only goes so far, other than I know what I like and what I don't like and what I think tells a story well. But I really appreciated that. And it's one of those things where, the art obviously was such a huge selling point on this and continues to stand out.
I really love his perspective on the art side of things. So looking forward.
Very last thing, we just had a couple more patron comments, and then we'll sign off here. So what Jared said kind of sums up a lot of this. He said, Hush was one of my earliest exposures to Batman comics and the first of the then modern era. While I agree the mystery was rather obvious, it at least felt fair, unlike Loeb's other mysteries like The Long Halloween. But like The Long Halloween, I think it shines best in Bruce's dynamics with his cast. The biggest being the progression of the relationship with Catwoman. Jim Lee's art is also at his strongest, especially his painted pages. So I think that kind of sums up a lot of what we've been saying here. So I'm with you, Jared. And then let's see, 5 million here said, did this story sell you on the Bat-Cat relationship? And do you and Ralph have a preferred love interest for the Dark Knight? I think we already addressed that. He also says justice for Harold. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, justice for Harold. And then this is kind of a little bit of a tee up for next time. He says, the original Hush isn't my cup of tea. I was more into Heart of Hush by Paul Dini. Yeah. Rereading this the last couple of days, it did hold up better. I actually like the Jason Todd stuff. They should have made him Hush, to be honest. The real meat for me was the Batman and Catwoman relationship. I've been a big fan of their relationship since I was a teen, and this story played a big part in that. So to 5 million's point, yep, next time we're going to be getting into those sequels in the pages of Gotham Knights and Paul Dini's Detective Comics and Streets of Gotham, including that story that he mentioned here. So I'm excited to kind of stay in this mode and continue to follow the Hush thread.
Yeah, can't have Heart of Hush without Hush.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you joining me for this.
Yeah, thanks again. Always a blast.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, audience. Make sure you come back next time as our Hush coverage continues. Until then, remember, it's not who you are underneath, but what you do that defines you. Support the show and receive exclusive content by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Rewards include our DCU spinoff podcast, advanced listens, sponsorship opportunities, and more. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please rate and review the podcast via your platform of choice. Subscribe so that you never miss an episode, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey, a long-running weekly series mining Superman's vast mythology across time and media. Subscribe today. Lighting the Bat Signal is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Kill Me Kate.